The galaxy was old. Older than any civilization currently living in it could fully understand. Thousands of species had risen, built empires, collapsed, and been forgotten. Stars had been born and died before the first creature on any planet had ever looked up and wondered what those lights in the sky actually were. The universe did not care about any of them. It never had. It simply continued, cold, vast, and completely indifferent. But the civilizations that survived long enough, the ones that made it past their own wars, their own selfishness, their own fear, they eventually found each other. And when they did, they formed something. Not a government exactly. Not a military alliance exactly. Something older and more practical than either of those things. They called it the Galactic Compact. The Compact had rules, borders, agreements written across centuries of negotiation, blood, and compromise. Every species that joined gave something up and got something back. You surrendered the right to expand without permission. In return, you got protection. You got trade. You got communication. You got the quiet, boring, beautiful gift of not being at war. It worked. Mostly. There were 41 species in the compact when the Vorrkai first arrived at the outer rim of what the star charts called, in careful, neutral, deliberately boring language, Sector Null. The maps beyond Sector Null were not blank. Blank would have been fine. Blank meant unknown, and unknown meant opportunity. No, the maps beyond Sector Null were not blank at all. They were marked. Every chart, every navigation database, every pilot's guide across all 41 species carried the same marker at that border. A single red line. And beneath it, in every language simultaneously, one sentence. Human space. Do not enter without authorization. The Vorrkai High Commander, a creature named Drethvon, stood in front of that line on the holographic map and laughed. It was not a cruel laugh. It was not even an arrogant laugh. It was simply the laugh of someone who had never been told no before and genuinely did not understand what the word meant in practice. Human space, he said, rolling the words around like they tasted strange. These humans. The compact protects them. His navigator, a younger Vorrkai named Seath, pulled up the compact file on humans. It was surprisingly thin for a species that warranted their own color-coded border warning. They joined the compact 42 years ago, Seath said. Before that, no contact. Complete isolation. Self-imposed. Self-imposed, Drethvon repeated. They locked themselves away? According to the records, yes. They had conflicts. Internal ones. Large scale. They were dealing with their own problems. And now? Seath hesitated. That hesitation was small, barely noticeable. But it was there. Now they are members. Quiet ones. They don't attend many compact sessions. They don't expand. They don't make demands. They just exist. Behind that line. Drethvon looked at the red line again. His fleet was 47 warships strong. His mission was simple. The Vorrkai needed 3 star systems on the other side of that border. Not for war. Not for conquest in the dramatic sense. Just for resources. Minerals. Energy. The cold, practical mathematics of a growing civilization that had simply run out of convenient space on their side of the galaxy. The compact had told them no. The 3 systems they wanted fell inside human space. The humans had said no. Politely, quietly, without drama or threats. Just, no. And Drethvon had decided that no was not an acceptable answer. Plot a course, he said. Straight through the line. We survey those 3 systems, we plant our flags, and we send the compact a message explaining that the humans clearly weren't using that space anyway. Seath pulled up the course. His hands moved slowly. Commander, he said very carefully, the compact files on humans, they're thin. But there are notes. From older species. Species that have been in the compact far longer than we have. The Drethe. The Solyanari. Even the Vex. What kind of notes? Seath read one aloud. It was written by a Solyanari ambassador, dated 38 years ago, shortly after humanity joined the compact. It said, "We have reviewed humanity's historical and military records as part of standard admission processing. We are choosing not to share the full contents of this review in open compact session. We will say only this, the border markers around human space should be respected. Not because humans have asked us to enforce them, but because of what happened the last time a species ignored a border that humans had drawn." The bridge was quiet for a moment. What happened the last time? Drethvon asked. Seath looked up from the file. That part, he said quietly, is not in the records. Drethvon stared at the red line on the map for a long time. Then he straightened his shoulders, lifted his chin, and said the words that would change everything. Take us in. The moment the first Vorrkai ship crossed the red line, three things happened simultaneously. First, every long-range sensor on every ship in the fleet registered a brief, sharp spike of electromagnetic energy, like a pulse or a heartbeat, radiating outward from deep inside human space. It lasted exactly 1 second. Then it was gone. Second, every communication channel on every ship went silent. Not jammed. Not blocked. Silent. As if the signals were simply being absorbed. Swallowed by something patient and enormous that had no interest in communicating back. Third, a single message arrived on the fleet's main frequency. It was not encrypted. It was not aggressive in tone. It was delivered in perfect Vorrkai, with the correct regional dialect of the Drethvan's home continent, which no human should have had any reason to know. It said, "This is Sentinel Station Oris, Human Boundary Authority. You have entered human space without authorization. This is your first and only notification. Please identify your vessel, state your purpose, and hold your current position. A response team is being dispatched. Estimated arrival, 4 hours." That was all. Drethvan read the message twice. 4 hours, he said. They need 4 hours to reach us? That suggests, Seath said carefully, that their nearest station or ship is quite far from this border. Exactly. Drethvan felt the tension in his shoulders ease slightly. If they were truly guarding this line, they would have something here. At the border. Ready. The fact that they need 4 hours tells us exactly how seriously they take this. He ordered the fleet to continue moving. Deeper into human space. Toward the 3-star systems he had come for. What Drethvan did not know, what none of the Vorrkai knew, was that the 4-hour response time was not because the humans were far away. It was because the humans were already there. Sentinel Station Oris was not a distant installation sending ships across empty space. It was a network. A web of quiet, dark, perfectly still monitoring points spread across the entire boundary of human space like nerve endings on skin. They did not announce themselves. They did not broadcast. They simply watched, recorded, and waited for instructions. The 4 hours was not travel time. It was paperwork time. Inside the compact, humans had a reputation for being oddly bureaucratic. Other species found it mildly amusing, this tendency of humans to document everything, file everything, record everything in triplicate before acting. What looked like slowness was actually something else entirely. Humans had learned, through their own long and violent history, that the most dangerous thing you could do was act without a record of why you acted. Every response, every intervention, every use of force had to be logged, justified, and approved before it happened. So the 4 hours was humans filling out forms. In those 4 hours, Drethvan's fleet traveled deeper into human space, scanning the area, finding it remarkably empty. No ships. No stations they could detect. No signs of habitation in this outer region. The 3 systems they wanted were still days away, but the path looked clear and open. On the 4th hour, exactly as promised, contact was made. A single ship appeared on their sensors. Just one. It had not come from the direction of the border. It had simply appeared as if it had been sitting quietly nearby with every system powered down below detectable levels. It was not a large ship. By Vorrkai military standards it was medium-sized. Compact. Clean lines. No visible weapon ports, though Seath noted with quiet unease that the absence of visible weapons did not mean the absence of weapons. A human voice came through the communication channel. Come. Professional. Not threatening in tone at all. Commander Drethvan of the Vorrkai Expeditionary Fleet, this is Captain Elena Marsh, HBA Response Vessel Threshold. I'm going to ask you directly, and I'd appreciate a direct answer. Do you understand that you are inside human space without authorization? Drethvan responded. We understand the designation. We contest its validity as it applies to unclaimed systems that... Thank you, Captain Marsh said, interrupting him so smoothly and politely that it took Drethvan a full second to realize he had been interrupted. That's a yes. You understand where you are. I'm noting that in my report. A brief pause. Commander, I'm required by protocol to give you a clear picture of your situation before we proceed. May I do that? You may, Drethvan said, more out of curiosity than courtesy. You have 47 warships. That is a significant force. I want you to know that I respect that the Vorrkai build excellent vessels and your crews are clearly well trained. What I need you to understand is that the reason we responded with one ship is not because one ship is all we have. It's because one ship is all we felt was appropriate for a first conversation. Another pause. The conversation after this one would involve more ships. I think you can do the math on where that leads. Silence on the Vorrkai bridge. I'm also required, Marsh continued, still calm, still professional, to inform you that your fleet has been continuously tracked and recorded since the moment you crossed the boundary line. Every reading, every scan, every communication you've had internally. Not because we plan to use it against you, but because that's how we do things. Everything is on record. The compact will receive a full report regardless of how this ends. Drethvon leaned forward. You are one ship. Yes, Marsh agreed pleasantly. You are asking 47 warships to turn around. I'm asking you to turn around, she corrected. The 47 ships are yours, Commander. They'll do what you tell them to do. This is really a conversation between you and me. It was, Drethvon thought later, the most unsettling thing anyone had ever said to him. Captain Elena Marsh was 39 years old. She had joined the Human Boundary Authority at 22, straight out of the Naval Academy in New Brisbane. She had spent 17 years doing exactly this, showing up at the edge of incidents, talking to people who had made the mistake of crossing into human space, and giving them the clearest possible picture of what they had walked into. She had done this 41 times. 41 incidents. 41 times a ship or a scout or a full fleet had crossed the red line for one reason or another. Sometimes curiosity. Sometimes greed. Sometimes genuine navigational error. Once, memorably, a compact diplomatic vessel whose autopilot had malfunctioned in a way that their engineers still couldn't fully explain. 41 times Marsh had responded. 41 times she had talked to them. Shown them the picture. Given them the choice. 39 of those incidents had ended with the intruders turning around and going home. 2 had not. Marsh did not talk about those 2. Not because they were classified, they were fully documented and available to any compact member who requested the files. She didn't talk about them because the files themselves had a way of ending conversations. Once you read what had happened to those 2 groups, you tended to stop asking questions and start thinking very carefully about every border marker you had ever dismissed as decorative. Now, sitting in the captain's chair of the threshold, she looked at the sensor display showing 47 Vorrkai warships holding position 200 kilometers ahead of her, and she felt something she always felt in these moments. Not fear, exactly. More like the particular kind of tiredness that comes from having the same conversation over and over, hoping this time it ends the same way as the 39 before it, and not the 2 that didn't. Her first officer, Lieutenant James Okafor, came to stand beside her chair. He was 26, brilliant, and still young enough that these situations made his hands sweat. They're not moving, he said. I know. The commander hasn't responded in 6 minutes. I know. Is that good or bad? Marsh thought about it. It means he's thinking. Thinking is good. The ones who respond immediately without thinking are the ones who worry me. Okafor nodded. Then, quietly, he asked the question that junior officers always eventually asked. Captain, what actually happened? With the 2 who didn't turn back? The files are available but the language is very dry. Clinical. It doesn't really explain. The Kethare, Marsh said. She said it without looking away from the sensor display. 12 years ago. A Kethare resource fleet. 30 ships. They crossed the line in Sector 7, deep southern boundary. They had been warned twice. Once by automated beacon, once by a response officer like me. They decided the warnings were a bluff. And they went for the system they wanted. A gas giant with massive helium-3 deposits. They started their extraction equipment. They were there for about 6 hours before, she stopped. Before the situation was resolved. Resolved how? Marsh was quiet for a moment. The compact received a full incident report 48 hours later. All 30 Kethare ships were destroyed. No human casualties. The Kethare government filed a formal protest with the compact. The compact reviewed the case, determined that the Kethare had been warned multiple times through proper channels, and dismissed the protest. She paused. The Kethare never came back. No Kethare ship has been within 50 light-years of human space since. Okafor was very still. And the second time? The second time, Marsh said, I'd rather you read the file yourself. But I'll tell you this. After the second time, the compact added a new standing recommendation to the navigation guide for human space. They didn't mandate it as law because the compact doesn't work that way. But the recommendation was clear. What did it say? She finally turned to look at him. Her face was calm. Completely calm. The way a person's face is calm when they have made a kind of permanent peace with something large and heavy. It said, if you find yourself at the human space border with any intention other than authorized commerce or diplomacy, you should ask yourself one question before crossing. Not, can we win? Not, are they watching? The question was, do we understand what we are starting? Because humans, she said, don't do warning shots. They don't do gradual escalation designed to demonstrate force while preserving an off-ramp. When humans decide that someone has crossed a line, a real line, a final line, they don't stop until the problem is completely, permanently, and thoroughly resolved. She turned back to the display. It's not that they're cruel, she added. It's that they're thorough. There's a difference. Most species use force to send a message. Humans use force to end a situation. Completely. And once they start, she exhaled slowly, it's very hard to get them to stop. On the sensor display, the 47 Vorrkai ships continued to hold position. And then Drethvan's voice came back through the channel. Captain Marsh, he said. His voice was different now. Something had changed in it. Not defeated, Drethvan was not a creature who did defeated easily. But something had shifted. I have a question. Go ahead, she said. The systems we want, the 3 systems in this sector, are they actually being used? Is there anyone there? Any human presence? Marsh took a breath. And then she made a decision that she would think about for years afterward. A decision that was not in the protocol. Not in the manual. Not in any of the 47 forms she had filed before this conversation began. She decided to tell him the truth. No, she said. There's no one there. Those 3 systems have minimal human infrastructure. A monitoring station in the second one. Automated. No crew. A long pause from Drethvan's end. Then why? He started. Because they're ours, Marsh said. Simply. Quietly. Because that line on the map is real. Because 41 species in the compact agreed it was real. Because we said so. She let that sit for a moment. Commander, the Vorrkai are not wrong to need resources. Your people are growing. That's not a crime. Apply to the compact for resource-sharing negotiations. Make your case. Humans have given resource access to other species before, through proper channels, with agreements, with terms. It's a slow process. It's a frustrating process. But it's the process. Another pause. And if we had simply asked, Drethvan said, from the beginning? You'd probably have gotten at least 2 of the 3 systems, Marsh said. Possibly all 3 with the right terms. The silence that followed was the longest yet. Drethvan did not give the order to turn back. Not yet. He sat in his command chair and he thought, which was something his subordinates recognized as either very good or very dangerous depending on the topic he was thinking about. His fleet was still. 47 ships hanging in the dark of human space like a question that hadn't been answered yet. Seath approached him quietly. Commander. The crew is waiting. I know. The 3 systems are still 6 days out at standard speed. I know that too. The human ship hasn't moved. Drethvan looked at the sensor image of the threshold. 1 ship. Sitting there without any apparent concern, like a person who had stopped to watch a storm from their front porch. Not worried, just watching. He had been in military command for 20 years. He understood positioning. He understood the psychology of confrontation. And something about this human captain's complete lack of visible anxiety was more unsettling than any weapon display could have been. Pull up everything we have on human military history, he said. Seath hesitated. We've already reviewed the compact file. Not the compact file. Everything. Deep archive. The older species keep records, the Salyanari, the Drethai. They've been around long enough to have watched humans from the beginning. Find it. It took 20 minutes. The archive was not easy to access. Some of it was sealed, requiring formal data sharing requests that Seath sent without much hope of quick approval. But some of it was open. Historical documentation. Academic records. The kind of dry, scholarly material that military commanders rarely bothered with until the moment they very badly needed it. Drethvan read for 2 hours. He read about a species that had spent approximately 4,000 years in a state of near-constant internal warfare. Not occasional conflicts. Not border skirmishes. Sustained, industrial, creative, devastatingly inventive warfare against themselves. They had developed weapon systems not to fight alien threats but to fight each other. They had refined tactics, strategies, logistics, and psychological operations through thousands of years of practice, on themselves. He read about something called the Second World War, which had lasted 6 years and killed somewhere between 70 and 85 million members of the human species. And within 4 years of that war ending, humans had developed the technology to destroy entire cities with single weapons. Not in response to an alien threat. In response to each other. He read about something called the Cold War, where 2 large groups of humans spent 50 years pointing enough destructive power at each other to render their planet uninhabitable, neither side firing, not because they couldn't but because both sides had independently arrived at the same mathematical conclusion, that starting was the same as losing. He read about the century that followed, the long reconstruction humans called it, where they had taken all of that accumulated knowledge about how to destroy things and turned it, slowly and painfully and imperfectly, toward the project of fixing what they had broken. New energy systems. Ecological restoration. The first deep space programs. The long, grinding work of becoming something other than what they had been. And he read, in a Sayonari academic paper written 40 years ago, a single paragraph that he read 3 times before he fully absorbed it. What makes humanity unusual among spacefaring civilizations is not their capacity for violence, which is shared in varying degrees by most species that survive long enough to reach the stars. What makes them unusual is the specific character of that violence. It is not impulsive, not theatrical, not designed to demonstrate power or extract submission. Human violence, when it is deployed, is engineering. It is the application of accumulated technical knowledge to the specific problem of eliminating a threat permanently and completely. They do not fight to win. They fight to finish. The distinction is significant. Drethvan put the file down. He thought about 30 Cathare ships. Destroyed. No human casualties. 6 hours after they had started their extraction work. He thought about what kind of system you had to have in place, how prepared, how positioned, how ready, to do that in 6 hours without losing anyone on your side. He thought about Captain Elena Marsh, sitting alone in her one ship, filing paperwork for 4 hours before showing up to have a polite conversation with 47 warships. And for the first time in his adult professional life, Drethvan felt something he did not have a Vorrkai word for. His species had words for tactical caution. Words for strategic retreat. Words for the recalculation of odds. But this was something different. This was the particular cold feeling of a person who has just realized they have been walking toward something in the dark, and has finally found the light switch and wishes, genuinely, deeply wishes, that they had found it before they took quite so many steps. He opened the communication channel. "Captain Marsh," he said. "Commander," she replied. "Immediate." She had been waiting. "You said the process for resource-sharing negotiations is slow and frustrating." "It is," she agreed. "How slow?" "Typically 2 to 3 years for a full agreement. Faster if both parties are cooperative and the compact arbitration board isn't backlogged." Drethvan was quiet for a moment. "My people need those resources within 5 years or we face significant shortfalls." 2 to 3 years leaves you 2 to spare, Marsh said. "That's actually a workable timeline, Commander." Another pause. Drethvan looked at Seath, who was watching him with an expression of careful, contained relief. He looked at the rest of his bridge crew. At the sensor display showing 47 ships whose crews had followed him across a border that he now understood, truly bone-deep understood, he should never have crossed. "If we leave now," he said. "If we go back across the line and initiate formal negotiations through the compact. What happens to this incident? The report you filed. It stays on record," Marsh said. "I can't change that and I wouldn't even if I could. Everything goes on record. That's non-negotiable." A beat. "But a peaceful resolution with immediate withdrawal goes on record too. And that matters. When the Compact Arbitration Board reviews your resource request, the fact that you were here and chose to leave when asked, that matters a great deal. And if we don't leave?" The pause before her answer was very short. Barely a pause at all. "Then I file a different form," she said. "And the conversation we're having right now becomes the last easy conversation anyone from either of our species will have for a very long time." Drethvan breathed in. Breathed out. "Captain Marsh," he said. "I am going to ask you something, and I want you to know that I am asking it with complete sincerity, not as a challenge. Go ahead. Are you afraid right now?" A brief silence. And then to his surprise she laughed. It was a short laugh, genuine, not unkind. "Commander," she said, "I have been doing this job for 17 years. The first time I sat in this chair across from a fleet larger than mine, I was terrified. Completely. Pause. But I've done this 41 times now. And you know what I've learned. Tell me. The ones who cross the line, they always want something. Resources, territory, information, a demonstration of strength. Something specific and practical. And the ones who want something specific and practical, they can be talked to. They can be reasoned with. They have something to lose." Another pause. "The ones who scare me are the ones who cross the line and don't want anything. The ones who come in just to see what happens. Those are the ones who don't respond to reason." A beat. "You're not one of those, Commander. You want 3-star systems for your people. That's not evil. That's just need. And need can be negotiated. Drethvon sat with that for a moment. Then he gave the order. All ships, he said. Reverse heading. We are returning to the boundary line. Not all 47 ships turned around. 46 did. 46 ships rotated, recalibrated, and began the slow, orderly process of withdrawing from human space the way they had come in, visible, trackable, following the exact reverse of their entry course, which Marsh had specifically requested so that the automated monitoring network could log them out cleanly. The 47th ship did not move. It was a scout vessel. Small. Fast. Designated in the Vorrkai fleet registry as VS Thorn.7. Its commander was a young officer named Karethsal, and Karethsal had a problem that none of his superiors knew about yet. 3 weeks before the fleet had departed Vorrkai space, Karethsal had received a private transmission from a source he would not have been able to explain to a compact ethics board. The source had offered him something very specific. A sum of resources transferred to his family's account on the Vorrkai homeworld in exchange for one thing. One small thing that would be easy to hide inside the confusion of a large fleet operation. A deep scan of the interior of human space. Detailed. Comprehensive. The kind of scan that would map every monitoring station, every ship signature, every energy reading across a significant portion of human space's interior. Information that would be extraordinarily valuable to anyone planning future operations against humanity. Karethsal had agreed. He was young and his family was poor, and the price had seemed worth the risk when he was sitting safely in Vorrkai space imagining a routine resource survey mission. He was considerably less confident about that calculation now. But the scan was almost complete. His ship had been running it passively since the fleet entered human space. Passive scans that produced no detectable emissions, gathered data slowly and quietly. He needed 40 more minutes to finish the sweep. If he followed the fleet out now, he would have a partial scan. Incomplete. Possibly worthless to his contact. Possibly not enough to secure the payment he had already mentally spent. So he stayed. He cut his engines to zero. He went completely dark. No emissions, no active systems, nothing that would show up on a standard sensor sweep. He would finish the scan, then follow the fleet out, explain the engine malfunction that had delayed him, and no one would ever know. This was his plan. It was not a good plan. On the threshold, Okafor was watching the sensor display and counting. 46, he said. Captain, I'm counting 46 on the return heading. Marsh was already looking at it. I see it. There's a gap. Approximately where a scout-class vessel would be positioned. I know. Could be a sensor glitch. It's not, she said. She pulled up a secondary display, not the standard sensor suite but a different feed entirely. One that did not come from the threshold's own equipment. There, she said quietly. The feed showed a tiny heat signature. Barely there. The kind of emission produced by biological life support and passive computing at minimal power. Almost nothing. Almost invisible. Almost. They went dark, Okafor said. Yes. Can they hear this conversation? No. I switched to a frequency they can't access when I started using the secondary feed. Marsh stared at the tiny heat signature. A small ship. One person, possibly two. Doing something they very much did not want observed. Passive scan, she said quietly. That's what that signature profile looks like. They're collecting data. Okafor was quiet for a moment. What do we do? Marsh thought about her 41 incidents. About the 39 who had turned back and the 2 who hadn't. This was something different. This wasn't a fleet making a bold resource grab. This was one person, probably one person, making a private choice inside a larger situation. A choice that had been made for private reasons that had nothing to do with Vorrkai government policy. Get me a direct channel to Commander Drethvon, she said. Private. Encrypted. Okafor set it up. Marsh waited until the connection was confirmed, then spoke. Commander. I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear it carefully. A beat of silence from Drethvon's end. When he spoke, his voice was very controlled. How many of my ships are on the return heading? 46. A longer silence. I see. I don't think this is your operation, Commander. I think someone on your fleet made an independent decision. I'm telling you before I do anything else because, she paused, because you made the right call. You turned your fleet around. You chose the conversation. And I think you deserve to know what's happening before the situation changes. Drethvon's voice, when it came back, was very quiet and very careful. What are you going to do? My job, Marsh said. But I wanted you to know first. A beat. Is there anything you want to tell me before I proceed? A long silence. VS Thorn.7, Drethvon said at last. Scout Class. Commander Kareth Saul. 24 years old. His voice had something in it now that was not tactical calculation or strategic assessment. It was something older and more human, though he was not human, something that crossed species lines. Something that sounded very much like a commander who had just realized one of his people was about to do something that could not be undone. He has a family. A younger sister. Parents. Marsh closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. I'll do what I can, she said. But Commander, I need you to understand. If that scan completes and transmits, my options change. Significantly. How long does he have? Marsh looked at the heat signature. Calculated the passive scan rate. 32 minutes before the scan likely completes. Can you reach him directly? If I do, he'll know he's been detected. He may transmit what he has immediately rather than risk capture. Drethvon made a sound that had no Vorrkai translation but communicated itself perfectly across species lines anyway. It was the sound of a leader realizing that the mistake of a person under their command had just become their problem to solve, and that the tools available for solving it were all terrible. Let me try, he said. Give me 5 minutes. Kareth Saul was watching the scan percentage climb when his private command channel activated. Not the fleet-wide channel. His personal one. The one that only senior officers could access. The voice was Drethvon's. Kareth Saul, the commander said. Just the name. Nothing else for a moment. Kareth Saul's blood went cold. His hands, which had been steady on the controls, stopped moving entirely. Commander, he said. His voice was remarkably calm for someone whose heart was doing what his heart was doing. We had an engine malfunction. I was just about to. Stop, Drethvon said. Not harshly. Just, stop. Don't. Not to me. Not right now. Silence. How much is left? Drethvon asked. Kareth Saul looked at the display. 28 minutes. Is it worth it? Whatever they offered you, is it worth what happens if that scan transmits? Kareth Saul didn't answer. Because the honest answer was that he had no idea what happened if that scan transmitted. He knew what he'd been paid to do. He did not know what came next, what the data would be used for, what it might enable, what shape the consequences might take. He had looked away from that part of the calculation when it had made him uncomfortable. You've been detected, Drethvon said. The human captain knows exactly where you are and what you're doing. She came to me first. Before taking action. That is why you are still there and not. He stopped. She gave me 5 minutes to reach you. Kareth Saul stared at the scan display. 27 minutes now. The number felt simultaneously very close and impossibly far. Commander, my family? I know about your family, Drethvon said. I know about the debt. I know more about the situation than you think I do, Kareth Saul, and none of that information makes what you're doing acceptable. Pause. But it makes it understandable. And there is a difference. If I stop now. If you stop now, power up, identify yourself and follow the fleet out, the human captain has told me she will do what she can. What she can do I don't know. But she made the choice to give you this chance. That is not nothing. 26 minutes. Kareth Saul thought about his sister. She was 17. She had been accepted to an engineering academy that their family could not pay for. The money from this mission, this one thing, would cover 3 years. He had done the math so many times he could do it in his sleep. 3 years. 1 scan. How big could the consequences really be? He understood now, sitting in the dark of human space with a human captain he had never met, knowing exactly where he was, that he had been asking the wrong question. Not how big are the consequences, but, consequences to whom? He had calculated the benefit to his family very carefully and the harm to everyone else not at all. She's waiting, Drethvon said. Kareth Saul reached out. His hand was shaking slightly. He terminated the scan. 26 minutes of data, partial, incomplete. He let it go. He powered his systems up, not fast, not sudden, but steadily, one system at a time, so that it read as deliberate and controlled rather than panicked. He activated his navigation and set a heading that matched the fleet's exit course. Then he opened a channel on the frequency the human captain had been using. This is VS Thorn.7, he said. Commander Kareth Saul. I am powering up and joining the fleet return heading. He paused. His voice was very quiet. I terminated the scan. I'm transmitting the partial data file to you directly so you can verify it was incomplete and that nothing was transmitted externally. A silence. And then Captain Marsh's voice. Received, she said. I'm reviewing it now. Pause. Thank you, Commander Kareth Saul. He had not expected to be thanked. It hit him harder than anything else that had happened in the last hour. He sat in his chair in the small dark cabin of Thorn.7, following his fleet toward the boundary line, and he thought about how easily this could have gone another way. How close 26 minutes had felt. How different the universe he was flying through right now would have looked if he had made a different choice in the last 2 minutes. "Captain Marsh," he said before he could stop himself. "Yes." "Why did you?" He stopped. Restarted. "Why did you give me the chance? Why not just?" "Because you're 24 years old," she said. "And because your commander told me you have a family." Pause. "And because the scan was incomplete. Whatever you were going to do with it, without the complete data, it's not very useful to anyone." Another pause. "And because," she seemed to be choosing her words carefully, "because the job I do isn't about catching people. It's about protecting a line. You're on the right side of the line now. That's what matters." Carousel did not say anything else. He flew toward the boundary and he thought about lines. The ones on maps. The ones in choices. The ones you didn't know you were crossing until you were already on the wrong side. The Vorrkai fleet crossed back over the red line 41 hours after it had crossed in. Marsh watched every ship go. She counted them. 47. Every one. She confirmed their exit vectors, logged the timestamps, filed the final incident report, and then sat back in her chair and let out a long, slow breath that she had been holding in some sense, since the moment the first alert had come in. Okafor brought her coffee. Real coffee, which on a boundary patrol vessel was a luxury that existed because Marsh had made it a point to always have real coffee on any ship she commanded. Some things mattered. 41, he said. 41, she agreed. All peaceful? All peaceful. She wrapped her hands around the cup. Well, mostly. The Thorn.7 situation was close. But it resolved. It resolved. She drank. "James, write up the Thorn.7 situation separately from the main incident report. Full details. Flag it for the Compact Ethics Board and the Vorrkai government simultaneously." Okafor looked at her. "Both. The Vorrkai government needs to know someone inside their fleet was operating with outside contact. That's not a human boundary authority problem, that's a Vorrkai internal security problem and they deserve to know about it." She paused. "And Carousel cooperated. Voluntarily. The ethics board should have that on record when they review his case. It won't eliminate the consequences but it should shape them." Okafor nodded and went to write the report. Marsh stayed in her chair and thought about Drethvan. About the sound in his voice when he'd asked how long Carousel had. About the fact that he had asked to try first before she acted. About the choice he had made when he turned 46 ships around. She pulled up a blank message form. Addressed it to the Compact Resource Allocation Board. Copied the Vorrkai Compact representative. She wrote, "Following the resolution of Incident 41A attached, I am submitting a formal recommendation that the Vorrkai Resource Negotiation Application, which I understand has been pending for approximately 8 months, be prioritized for arbitration review. The Vorrkai Expeditionary Commander demonstrated cooperative behavior and good faith engagement during this incident, and I believe timely processing of their resource application would serve the interests of stable relations in this sector. Captain E. Marsh, HBA Response Vessel Threshold." She sent it before she could second-guess herself. Then she filed 17 more forms, logged 4 equipment maintenance requests, wrote a commendation letter for Okafor's performance during the incident, and finally at 0300 ship time went to sleep. In her bunk in the quiet dark of the threshold, she lay on her back and thought, as she often did after incidents, about the 2 times. The ones that hadn't resolved. She did not think about them with guilt exactly. She had not failed in those situations. She had followed protocol. Given the warnings. Offered the choices. The choices had been made. She thought about them the way you think about weather. Not personal. Not a moral failure. Just, what happens when certain conditions are present and certain decisions are made and the mathematics work out the way they work out. She hoped, she always hoped, every time before every incident, that this one would be number 42 in the resolved column. It was. She slept. 3 weeks later, the Compact Resource Allocation Board sent a message to the Vorrkai government. The arbitration review of their resource application had been expedited. A preliminary agreement was being offered. 2 of the 3 star systems they had requested, full resource access, 50-year lease, standard compact terms. The 3rd system was being held pending a separate environmental impact review, which typically resolved within 18 months. The Vorrkai government accepted the same day. Drethvon received a personal copy of the agreement. He read it in his office on the Vorrkai homeworld, in the building where he had given his first military briefing 20 years ago, and he sat with it for a long time. 2 systems. Not 3. But 2. With terms. With agreements. With the kind of stability that his people's resource planners could build actual programs around. He thought about what would have happened if he had not listened to the sound in his own gut when he was reading those Salyunari academic files. If he had pushed through. If he had gone for the systems. If Karasal had been 3 minutes faster, or if Marsh had been 3 minutes less willing to give him those 5 minutes. He did not think about it long. There was no productive mathematics in that direction. He filed the agreement, forwarded it to the Resource Planning Division, and went home for the first time in 4 months. His daughter was 6 years old and she had been working on a drawing the entire time he was gone. She showed it to him at the dinner table, a picture of a spaceship flying through what she had decided stars looked like, which was mostly large yellow circles. "Where is it going?" he asked her. She considered this with the gravity of someone for whom the question was genuinely complex. "Somewhere good," she said finally. "Somewhere it's allowed to go." Drethvon looked at the drawing for a long time. "Yes," he said. "That's the right kind of place to go." 14 months after the Vorrkai incident, in a completely different sector of the human space boundary, something was watching. It had been watching for a long time. Longer than the Vorrkai fleet had existed. Longer than the compact itself, though it had no interest in the compact. The compact was a structure built by civilizations that needed structures, and the thing watching had no such need. It did not have a name that translated into any language currently in use. The closest approximation in English would be something like the congregation, not a religious word, simply descriptive. A gathering of separate things that had, over centuries, learned to act as a single thing when the situation required it. The congregation had been watching human space for 47 years. Since before humanity had joined the compact. Since before the Red Line had been formally established. They had watched humanity's emergence from its isolation period, watched the negotiations with the compact, watched the establishment of the Boundary Authority, watched the 41 incidents and their resolutions, and they had learned. They were patient. Patience was their primary quality. They had evolved in conditions where patience was not a virtue but a survival mechanism. Their home system's resources renewed on a timescale of centuries, and species that could not wait centuries did not last. But they had also evolved in conditions where resources were finite and competition was total. Every other species in their home system was gone. Not absorbed, not displaced, gone. The congregation had not done this through violence exactly. They had done it through a particular kind of strategic patience. They waited until a competitor was at its weakest point, energy shortage, disease, internal conflict, and then they moved. Completely. Finally. The way Marsh would have recognized. They had come to human space because of a scan. Not Karathal's scan, that one had been incomplete, useless. An older scan, conducted 15 years ago by one of their own instruments placed on an asteroid in a system adjacent to the boundary. A partial reading. Enough to suggest that human space contained something extraordinary. Not minerals. Not energy deposits. Something else. The scan had picked up a signal, faint, periodic, emanating from deep within human space's core systems. A signal that the congregation's analysts had spent 15 years studying. A signal that appeared to be artificial in origin and consistent with a type of technology that the congregation had been theorizing about for 200 years but had never been able to build themselves. They called it, in their own language, the deep anchor. A technology that could, in theory, allow a civilization to achieve something that most species considered impossible. The permanent, stable, self-sustaining modification of a star's energy output. Not harvesting. Not using. Controlling. A civilization with deep anchor technology could, in principle, manage stellar evolution. Feed stars. Stabilize them. Keep them burning across timescales that dwarfed ordinary stellar lifespans. For a species like the congregation, patient, slow, built around century-scale resource cycles, deep anchor technology would be transformative. It would eliminate the single constraint that had defined their entire existence. It would make them, in the most practical sense imaginable, permanent. They had spent 15 years confirming the signal, planning the approach, studying human space's defenses, the Boundary Authority, the incident record. All 41 of them. 41 incidents. 41 times an unauthorized entity had crossed the line. 41 times a single human response vessel had shown up to have a conversation. 41 peaceful resolutions, except for the 2 which had involved fleets. The congregation did not plan to send a fleet. They did not plan to have a conversation. They planned to do what they had always done. Move quietly. Move completely. Move in a way that was finished before anyone knew it had started. They had identified 47 points along the human space boundary where the monitoring network had minor gaps, places where the coverage of one station ended slightly before the coverage of the next began. Individually, each gap was too small to exploit. Together, threaded precisely, they formed a path. A path that the congregation had spent 15 years mapping. On a cold night, space was always cold, but this particular void had the specific temperature of something waiting. The congregation began to move. They were not ships exactly. They were not biological exactly. They were a distributed intelligence that had learned to travel between star systems by methods that the Compact's scientific community had theorized about in papers that the Compact's military community had marked as theoretical and therefore low priority. They moved through the gaps in the monitoring network. And somewhere deep inside human space, in a monitoring room that no Compact member except humans had ever seen, a single light turned red on a display panel that had never, in 40 years of operation, shown anything but green. A human analyst, young, just 2 years into the job, on night shift because everyone started on night shift, looked at the red light and felt their heart rate change. They did not reach for the standard alert protocol. The standard alert protocol was for the 41 kinds of incidents that had already happened. This was something the display classified as a category null event, a designation that the analyst had read about in training and had privately assumed was theoretical. Category null meant, something is inside human space that we have no record of, no profile on, and no established response protocol for. The analyst reached for a different panel entirely. A red handset. Old technology, physical, hardwired, not networked, not hackable. The kind of communication tool you use when you want to be absolutely certain the message gets where it's going. They picked it up and said 4 words. 4 words that had not been said in 40 years of human boundary authority operation. 4 words that, when they were spoken, automatically woke up 17 people in 11 different locations across human space, all of whom had been sleeping quietly and hoping they would never hear those words in their professional lifetimes. Category no. It's in. The 17 people who woke up were not the highest-ranking people in human space. They were not generals or politicians or diplomats. They were, by design and by choice, something different. They were the people who knew. Every civilization reaches a point where certain knowledge becomes, not classified exactly, not secret, but separated. Maintained by a specific group of people who carry it not as power but as weight. The knowledge of what you are capable of when you have to be. The knowledge of what it cost last time. The knowledge of what it means to be thorough. Humanity called these people, informally, the archive. Formally, they had a longer title that no one used in conversation. They were analysts, historians, engineers, strategists, not soldiers mostly. People who understood the full picture. People who could look at a category null event and understand what it meant. The senior member of the archive was a woman named Dr. Ruth Calloway. She was 67 years old, had white hair that she kept short, and had spent 32 years inside the archive after 20 years as a xenosociologist at the University of Cape Town. She had studied 43 alien civilizations in academic depth. She had read everything. She had seen enough of humanity's history to understand both what it was capable of and what it cost. She was eating toast when her red handset activated. She set the toast down very carefully, answered the call, listened to the 4 words and said, "Give me a full packet in 10 minutes. The packet arrived in 9. She read it standing at her kitchen counter in her small house in a city that did not appear on any public map, in a location that was technically inside human space but practically inside something even further removed from the ordinary world. The packet told her, something had entered human space through the boundary network gaps. Multiple points of entry, simultaneous, coordinated. The monitoring network had logged the entries but not before they happened. After, as the entries disturbed the coverage pattern and left a readable trace. Whatever it was had studied the network carefully. Very carefully. Long-term study, the gap exploitation was too precise to be accidental. She read the signal analysis from the deep interior monitoring stations. The periodic signal that had been logged for years, she knew about it, had read the reports, was showing increased amplitude. As if something was getting closer to it. As if something had heard it and was moving toward it. She called the other 16. The conversation lasted 4 hours. It was calm. Methodical. The kind of conversation that people have when they have prepared for something for a long time and the preparation is finally relevant. They went through protocols. They reviewed what was known about the intruder, very little. They reviewed what was known about the signal, somewhat more. They made decisions. One of the decisions was about Captain Elena Marsh. "She's the best active response officer we have," said a man named Torres, who ran the Tactical Analysis Division. 41 incidents. Never lost a resolution. "This isn't an incident," said Calloway. "No," Torres agreed. "But she knows the boundary better than anyone. And she knows how to talk to things that haven't been talked to before. She may not be able to talk to this one. Then we'll know that faster with her there than with anyone else." Calloway was quiet for a moment. Outside her window, a bird was sitting on a branch in the pale early morning light, doing what birds do, which is exist entirely in the present moment without any concern for category null events or the weight of knowing things. She watched it for a moment. "Brief her," she said. "Full briefing. Everything." "Everything?" "She's going in without a net," Calloway said. "She deserves to know exactly what she's flying toward." The briefing reached Marsh 3 hours later. She was still on the threshold in the southern boundary sector, catching up on paperwork from the Vorrkai incident when Okafor knocked on her cabin door with a look on his face that she recognized immediately. Not fear. Not confusion. The specific expression of someone who has just been handed information that has reorganized the way they understand the world. "Captain," he said. "Priority 1 from Archive Command." She took the packet. She read it. She did not say anything for approximately 4 minutes. Then she said, "Get us moving. Deep interior, best speed. I'll have a heading in 30 minutes. "What heading?" She looked at the coordinates in the briefing. The location of the signal. The deep anchor if the archives analysts were right. A place at the very center of human space that no boundary officer had ever had reason to go, because boundary officers worked the edges. "Home," she said. And then, more quietly to herself, "Whatever that means when something's already inside." The congregation moved through human space the way water moves through a crack in stone. Not forced. Not rushed. Following the paths of least resistance with the patience of something that had been patient for centuries and had no particular reason to change now. They encountered the monitoring network from the inside and found it more impressive than expected. The outer boundary was a perimeter. The interior was a web, dense, overlapping, redundant. Destroying it was not viable. The network was designed to flag its own disruption. Avoiding it completely would add months to their approach. So they did neither. They moved slowly enough that their passage through the network's overlapping zones looked, to the automated systems, like background noise. Like cosmic radiation. Like the ordinary blur of empty space going about its business. This was harder than it sounded. It required a level of precise coordination across the entire congregation that was, by the standards of most intelligence, extraordinary. But the congregation had been doing this for a very long time. They were old. They were patient. They were good at looking like nothing. They were not, however, infallible. The problem was the signal itself. The deep anchor signal that had brought them here, it was doing something they had not fully accounted for in their models. It was not just a passive emission. It was interactive. It was responding to their presence. As they moved closer to its source, the signal strengthened and shifted, as if reaching toward them the way a compass needle reaches toward north. The congregation's analysts registered this and flagged it as a potential concern. The signal responding to their approach implied that the source, whatever the deep anchor actually was, had some form of awareness. Some form of detection capability. If the deep anchor could sense them, then whoever controlled the deep anchor could also sense them. This changed the timeline significantly. They had planned for months. They now had days, possibly less. The congregation made a decision. Not the patient decision, not the careful decision. For the first time in centuries they moved fast. And on the threshold, pushing toward the interior at maximum sustainable speed, Marsh felt her secondary feed light up with 12 simultaneous tracking alerts. "It's moving fast now," Okafor said, reading the data. "It knows we know." "Yes." Marsh studied the movement pattern. Not random. Directed. Toward the signal source. "It's committed. Whatever it came for, it's going for it now. Can we get there first?" Marsh ran the math. The congregation was closer to the signal source than the threshold. Not by much. Their head start had been significant, but their movement through the interior network had been slow. Now that they were moving fast, the gap was, she ran the numbers again. "No," she said. "They'll get there before us. But only barely. So what do we do?" Marsh pulled up the archive briefing again. The section she had read and reread 4 times, looking for something she had not found yet. Information on the deep anchor itself. What it was. How it worked. What happened when something that was not human, something that had never been authorized, made contact with it. She found the line she had been looking for. It was in a technical footnote, buried under pages of physics and engineering theory, written in the careful dry language of people who wanted to document something accurately without dramatizing it. The deep anchor is not a passive technology. It is responsive. Access requires authentication, a biological and cognitive signature unique to the species that built it. Without authentication, an unauthorized access attempt will be registered by the system, and the system's response protocols will activate automatically. Marsh stared at that for a long moment. Then she opened a channel to archive command. "Dr. Calloway," she said, "I need to ask you something directly." Calloway's voice came back immediately. She had clearly been awake. "Go ahead, Captain." "The deep anchor's response protocols." Marsh chose her words carefully. "If an unauthorized entity reaches it and attempts access, what happens?" Pause. "Not long. Just enough." "The system was built during the early isolation period," Calloway said. "When we were not yet part of the compact. When we were still, very much, the version of ourselves that had spent 4,000 years learning how to protect things we decided mattered." "That's not an answer," Marsh said. "No," Calloway agreed. "It's context." Another pause. "The deep anchor protects itself, Captain. In the way that things built by that version of us tend to protect things. Thoroughly." Marsh closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. "Then I need to get there before they access it," she said. "Not to stop them from reaching it, but to give them the choice first." Silence from Calloway's end. "Then, Captain, your ship cannot." "I'm not planning to fight them," Marsh said. "I'm planning to talk to them. The way I always do." She paused. "Doctor, in 41 incidents, I have never had to let the situation reach the point where the choice was made for me. I don't want to start now." A very long silence. "You'll never make it in time," Calloway said. "Maybe not," Marsh agreed. "But I'm going to try." She looked at Okafor. "Maximum speed. Push every system we have. I want everything this ship can give." Okafor didn't hesitate. "Aye, Captain." The threshold accelerated into the dark. The deep anchor was not what the congregation had expected. They had expected a structure. A station perhaps, or a platform. Something built. Something tangible. What the signal had led them to was a point in space that looked, on every standard sensor, like absolutely nothing. Empty space. Not even particularly interesting empty space. But the signal was coming from here. Unmistakably. And as the congregation gathered at this point, their distributed consciousness coalescing into the closest thing to a physical presence they could achieve, they felt it. Not through instruments. Through something older and harder to name. A pressure. A weight. The sensation of being at the edge of something enormous that had been very, very still for a very long time and was now paying attention. They reached toward it. And the authentication system registered an unauthorized access attempt. Nothing visible happened. No light. No sound. No dramatic physical display. The universe did not announce itself. It simply noted. The way a very large and patient thing notes when something small and uninvited puts its hand on a door it was not meant to open. 30 seconds. That was how long the congregation had before the deep anchor's response protocols would complete their initial assessment and move to the next phase. 30 seconds was not long by most standards. For the congregation, whose thoughts moved at the speed of distributed light, it was enough time for a very long conversation with themselves. They assessed. They calculated. The human ship, the threshold, they had been tracking it since it started moving fast, was still 8 minutes away. There was no military presence at this location. No weapons. No blockade. Just a point in space and a signal and a silence that felt, to a species that had survived by reading silences correctly, like a very specific kind of waiting. 20 seconds. The congregation made a decision that surprised even themselves. They stopped reaching. They pulled back from the authentication boundary. Not far, just enough to pause the access attempt. Just enough to sit at the edge of the door without touching it again. And they waited. This was not their plan. Their plan had involved moving quickly, accessing, extracting, leaving before anyone arrived. But their plan had also been built on an assumption that the deep anchor was a passive technology. A tool waiting to be used. The tool did not feel passive. The tool felt like it was thinking about them. The congregation had survived for a very long time by knowing when they were outmatched. Not often. Almost never. But the knowledge of it, the cold, clear recognition of something larger than yourself, was instinctive. Survival deep. And standing at the threshold of the deep anchor with 19 seconds remaining on an authentication clock they did not control, the congregation felt something they had not felt in a very long time. They felt small. At 8 seconds remaining, the threshold arrived. Marsh came in fast, faster than response protocol recommended, which she was aware of and had consciously decided to ignore. She brought the threshold out of its acceleration burn in a way that her engineering team would want to have a conversation about later, and she cut directly into the space between the congregation and the deep anchor signal source. Marsh, Okafor said, reading his sensors. I don't know how to describe this. I have a contact that my instruments can't classify. It's in front of us and it's... I know, she said. How do you know? Because the signal changed when we arrived. It knows we're here. She opened a communication channel, not on any standard frequency, not on any protocol that existed in the Boundary Authority's database. On a frequency that the archive briefing had listed under a heading that said emergency interface only, theoretical. She broadcast on it anyway. My name is Elena Marsh, she said. I'm with the Human Boundary Authority. I'm speaking to whatever is at these coordinates. I know you're here. I know what you came for. She paused. I also know that you stopped. 8 seconds ago you stopped. I saw the authentication clock pause. Another pause. That means something. Something that chose to pause instead of push through, that's something I can talk to. Silence. Not the silence of empty space. A different kind of silence. The kind that has a listener in it. Okafor was very still beside her. His hands were folded in his lap, which was something she had never seen him do before. It was the posture of someone who has decided that their hands have nothing useful to contribute and should therefore stay out of the way. You came a long way, she said. You planned for a long time. Whatever you wanted from here, the deep anchor, it mattered enough to come all this way and study our border for 15 years. I know about the scan you placed on the asteroid and sector adjacent. I know how long you've been watching. She breathed. That kind of patience doesn't come from a careless species. You're careful. You think ahead. Still nothing. So think ahead now, she said. Think past this moment. Imagine you get through that door. Imagine you take what you came for. What happens next? She let the question sit. Not to you. I'm asking you what happens to us. To humans. What does a civilization do when something comes all the way inside their home, past every line they drew, past every warning they gave, and takes something from the very center of it? She waited. And then, not through any sensor, not through any instrument, not through any channel that Okafor could see or record, something changed in the quality of the space around them. A shift. As if the air, if there had been air, had moved differently for a moment. And a response arrived. Not in words. Not in any language. In something older than language, a kind of direct impression, a meaning without a medium, the closest thing to communication that a distributed consciousness moving through space could produce for a species that thought in sentences. It said, in the wordless language of pure meaning, we are very old. We are very tired. We need what is here. Marsh sat with that for a moment. I know, she said quietly. I know you need it. And I know that need feels like everything when you've been carrying it as long as you have. She paused. But HFY, from this moment forward, what you do next defines everything that comes after. Not just for you. For whatever this becomes. For whether this is a conversation or something else entirely. She looked at Okafor. His eyes were wide. She looked back at the space ahead of her. Tell me what you need, she said. Not how to get it from here. Tell me what the need actually is. Tell me what would be enough. Another silence. Longer this time. And then, piece by piece, impression by impression, meaning folding itself into a shape that her mind could hold, the congregation began to talk. They talked for 11 hours. Okafor made coffee at hour 3 and sat in his chair and listened to one side of a conversation that he could not hear, watching his captain receive something he had no instrument to measure. She sat completely still for most of it, not rigid, not tense, just still in the way of someone who is very focused and does not want to miss anything. He filed maintenance reports during the quiet stretches. It felt important to do something useful. At hour 7, Marsh asked him to open a channel to Archive Command. She spoke to Dr. Calloway for 40 minutes. Calloway was quiet for most of it, asking short, careful questions. At the end of the conversation, Calloway said, I'll need 2 hours to consult with the other 16. Stand by. The 2 hours passed. Marsh ate something. She didn't look at what it was. She kept the nonverbal channel open. The congregation was patient. They were very good at waiting. When Calloway came back, her voice was different. Not warmer exactly. but resolved. The way a voice sounds when a decision has been made and the decision has been accepted. Tell them yes, she said. The terms you outlined. We'll need to formalize it with the compact. That will take time, more time than either of us would prefer. But on our end we'll honor it. You're sure? Marsh asked. Pause. No, Calloway said honestly. I'm not sure. We've never done this before. We don't know if it works. We don't know what they actually are well enough to know if their end of it is even possible. Another pause. But you've been in that room with them for 7 hours. What does your gut say? Marsh thought about it. About the voice, the not voice, that had been pressing meaning into her for 7 hours. About the weight in it. About the specific, particular quality of something very old and very tired that is telling the truth because it has finally run out of energy for anything else. My gut says they're exactly what they told us they are, she said. Old, tired, scared. Desperately in need of something they couldn't figure out how to ask for. And they came to steal it instead. Yes. That's not great. No, Marsh agreed. But they stopped. When they could have pushed through, they stopped. And they've been here for 11 hours having a conversation when they could have tried again at any point. She paused. That's not nothing, Doctor. Calloway made a sound that was the sound of someone who has spent 32 years studying the things humanity was capable of and has made a careful decision to weigh what she knows about the worst against what she knows about the best. Tell them yes, she said again. Caro, from here, we build something new. That's what we do. Marsh turned back to the channel. She did not use words for this part. She had learned, in 11 hours, how the congregation communicated and how to meet them closer to halfway. She let the meaning form, not shaped into language first but into intention, into feeling, into the specific texture of yes, this is the agreement, this is what we are choosing. The agreement was this. The deep anchor would remain where it was and under human stewardship. It would not be accessed by the congregation unilaterally. But humanity would, over a period of years and under compact oversight, work with the congregation to study whether the deep anchor's technology, not taken but understood collaboratively, could address what the congregation actually needed. Which was not the technology itself. Which was what the technology could produce. Stability. Time. The chance to exist without the slow-motion catastrophe of a home system running down. The congregation's home star was dying. Not soon by human standards, 200 years was not soon. But for a civilization that moved at the speed the congregation moved, 200 years was not long at all. They had found the deep anchor signal and seen in it the first hope they had encountered in a century of searching. And they had done what they had always done, they had planned to take it. Because they had never learned another way. You're going to have to learn another way, Marsh had said at hour 4. Not because the old way is wrong, I'm not going to tell you that. I don't know enough about your history to judge. But because the old way won't work here. What's in that signal? It's not a tool. It's part of us. Part of our home. You can't take it without taking us with it. She had paused there for a long time. And we're not takeable, she had said. I need you to understand that. Not as a threat. As information. We are not a civilization that ends. We've tried to end ourselves multiple times in spectacular ways. We haven't managed it. Whatever you are, whatever you've survived, we've survived something too. And what we are on the other side of it is very hard to finish. Pause. So the question isn't whether you can take the deep anchor. The question is what happens after you try. And I am telling you honestly that neither of us wants to know the answer to that question. The congregation had been quiet for a very long time after that. And then they had started talking about what they actually needed. Now, at hour 11, the agreement settled into the space between them like something solid. Not signed, there were no signatures here, no forms, no protocol for this specific situation. Just two parties and a choice and the particular kind of trust that you extend when you have been talking honestly for 11 hours and the other side has not once tried to reach past you for the door. The congregation withdrew from the deep anchor point. Fully. Completely. They moved back, not toward the boundary line, not yet, but away from the signal into a holding position that the monitoring network could track clearly. A visible position. A deliberate one. Okafor was watching his sensors. They're moving, he said. I know. Away from the signal. Yes. Are they leaving? Marsh looked at the sensor display. At the tracking signature of something enormous and ancient and patient holding a position that said, in the clearest nonverbal language possible. We are waiting, we are not running, we are choosing to stay in this conversation. No, she said. They're staying. That's the point. She exhaled slowly. They're trusting us. Okafor sat with that for a moment. Is that good? It's terrifying, Marsh said. Because now we have to deserve it. She opened the channel to archive command again. Dr. Calloway. We need to start working on the compact filing. Category null resolution. First contact, non-hostile resolution, standing cooperation agreement pending formal ratification. First contact, Calloway said quietly. That's what this is. Yes. Pause. Elena, she said, first name which Calloway never used in professional communication. You know what you did today, don't you? Marsh looked out through the forward viewport of the threshold at the empty-looking space where the deep anchor lived and where something ancient and tired was patiently holding its position and waiting to find out what happened next in the story that had just fundamentally changed. I talked to someone, she said. Same as I always do. Calloway laughed. It was a short laugh, genuine, the laugh of someone who has been carrying weight for a very long time and has just felt it shift slightly. Same as you always do, she agreed. The formal process took 18 months. The compact convened a special session, the first special session in 22 years. The congregation was a challenging entity to categorize under compact frameworks. They did not have a homeworld exactly, not in the way the framework defined one. They were not, technically, a member species. They had never applied, had never sought compact recognition. They had simply existed, patient and unannounced, on the edge of everything. 41 compact species spent 18 months arguing about definitions. Humanity spent 18 months doing what they had always done, filing forms, documenting everything, building the structure that the agreement needed in order to be real. The Deep Anchor research program began 20 months after the day Marsh sat in the threshold and talked for 11 hours. It was small at first. A joint team, 3 human physicists, 2 archive engineers, and a congregation observer whose presence in the research station manifested as a specific kind of persistent warmth in the air that the human researchers eventually stopped noticing and started finding comforting. The first results came 3 years in. Preliminary. Encouraging. The kind of results that, in the specific language of long-shot scientific programs, meant, this might actually work. Drethvon read about it in a compact news summary, 2 years into his resource-sharing agreement, on a morning when he was running late for a meeting and was reading the summary too fast to absorb most of it. He almost skipped the item. It was in the science section, which he did not usually read. He read it. He read it again. He sat at his desk and thought about Karathsal, who had been reassigned to a ground position pending a compact ethics board review and who had, according to the last update Drethvon had received, been spending his waiting time volunteering at an engineering academy, helping students, paying something back in the only currency that was available to him. He thought about a red line on a map, about the sound of 47 ships turning around. He thought about his daughter's drawing. A spaceship going somewhere was allowed to go. He pulled up the compact resource negotiation portal. He had a quarterly review meeting in 20 minutes, and his resource planning team would want to discuss the timeline for the third system environmental review. It was going to be fine. Everything in this direction was going to be fine. He looked out his office window at the sky of the Vorrkai homeworld, pale orange in the early morning, the color of something just beginning, and he thought about what Elena Marsh had said to him once on a communication channel over a border he should never have crossed. The ones who want something specific and practical, they can be talked to. They have something to lose. He had thought at the time that she meant it as a comfort. Something reassuring about being the kind of person who could be reasoned with. He understood now, 2 years later, with the particular clarity that only time provides, that she had not meant it as comfort at all. She had meant it as a map. A map of the only territory that actually mattered, the space between what you need and what you're willing to do to get it. The space where every real conversation lives. The space where, if you are patient enough and honest enough and brave enough, you can sometimes find something better than what you came for. Far inside human space, in a research station that did not appear on any public chart, a human physicist named Dr. James Okafor, who had been promoted 3 times since the day he sat in the threshold's first officer chair and folded his hands in his lap and filed maintenance reports, was looking at a data set that made him feel, for the first time in his scientific career, genuinely, unexpectedly afraid of how much this might change. He took a breath. He opened his recording terminal. He began to document. Because that was how humans did things. Everything on record. Every step. Every choice. Every moment where something small and important had happened in the dark and someone had decided, Caro, from here, to do it differently. The galaxy was old. But it turned out, not finished. White heavy checkmark end.